In 2012, a shocking news story went viral. Teenager stabs her adoptive mother to death. Although the initial headline described a terrible and unexpected crime, the subsequent investigation revealed an even more disturbing motive. The media soon added that the young woman had committed the murder so she could be with her adoptive father. This and other statements flooded the internet, making the story of Sabrina and the family that had taken her in go viral. Today, we're going to delve deeper into the case to understand how a teenager came to commit such a heinous act. So, hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we have the case of Sabrina A. Zurich. To begin, it is essential to understand Sabrina's childhood and identity. From the beginning, his life was marked by hardship. She was born on October 27, 1994, on the outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio, United States. Her parents weren't necessarily young. Her father, Mark Zunich, was 35 years old, while her mother, Susan Edwards, was 5 years older. Even so, they were far from having their lives figured out or even on track. Before they met, both Mark and Susan used illegal substances. They had started during their teenage years, and from that point on, their dependence only grew until it became an addiction that led to trouble with the law. Again, this was before they had even met. 10 years before Sabrina was born, for example, her mother pleaded guilty to defrauding the Cuyahoga County Welfare Department in Ohio for lying in order to collect a series of benefits that totaled $2,000. For this crime, the woman was sentenced to 6 months in prison and another 5 months of probation, which she surprisingly completed without getting into any new trouble. And I say surprisingly because as soon as Susan was completely free, she got into trouble again, this time in Cleveland. In 1990, while she was pregnant with her first child, Sabrina's half brother, the woman was arrested after it was discovered that on more than one occasion she had supplied illegal substances to a group of teenagers between 14 and 15 years old. Susan was charged. However, since she was pregnant, her sentence was postponed until after she gave birth. Taking advantage of this, the woman tried to escape, but all she managed to do was earn a new charge for obstruction of justice. So, at some point between the birth of her first child and her new sentence, she met Mark, who was from the city of Wycliffe. Unlike Susan, Mark had never been to prison, but that didn't mean he was a calm person. On the contrary, he had been arrested several times over the years for drug possession, being under the influence of alcohol or other substances in public, disorderly conduct, among other things. The way both of them shared a lifestyle driven by addiction and self destruction probably helped them form a casual relationship that didn't become any more serious, not even when Susan got pregnant by him or when Sabrina was born. Although they tried to build a home together for a while, Mark's family, and especially his mother, quickly realized that it wasn't going to work. Not only was their relationship clearly troubled, but also neither of them was interested in taking care of Sabrina, and they would give her bottles with vodka to keep her from crying. When the baby turned 16 months old, the couple's neighbors called the police after hearing an especially violent argument between her parents, which ended with Mark being arrested for domestic violence. This marked the end of them living together. The man convinced Susan not to press charges against him, and, taking Sabrina with him, he moved to his mother's house on Regent Road in Wycliffe, where the little girl spent her early years being cared for by her paternal grandmother. Unlike her parents, her grandmother Anna was truly interested in taking care of Sabrina, so it wasn't hard for her to notice certain behaviors that didn't seem normal, which led her to consult some doctors. In 1998, when she was 4 years old, Sabrina was diagnosed with attention deficit and hyperactivity, so it was suggested that she start taking medication. And even though her grandmother took good care of her, the situation at home was far from ideal. Mark was still living there, and according to statements from the neighbors, the police had to come over practically all the time because of the constant problems Mark caused when he was drunk. Many times, these disturbances he caused also involved Susan. With her, even though he no longer lived with her, he still had an on and off relationship. In 2006, for example, when Sabrina was 11 years old, the Wycliffe police had to intervene in an extremely violent argument between her parents. According to the records, it was the neighbors who called the authorities after seeing Mark drag Susan out of the house by her hair, yelling things like, "Thanks, never come back to my house," along with violent insults directed at her and her friends. When the police arrived, Mark was clearly under the influence of alcohol, but he had no problem stating that Susan had stolen the money he had given her to buy alcoholic drinks, and he also claimed that all her friends were hired killers. Obviously, his words were not taken seriously, especially because when speaking with Anna and Susan, both mentioned that Mark had stopped taking his medication and was not in a good state of mental health. In the report, those who handled the situation concluded that Mark was a person suffering from schizophrenia, with episodes of paranoia, and that without his medication, he had become violent toward the mother of his child. But Susan wasn't the only person Mark was violent with. In 2007, he was arrested after breaking a glass door at the pub where he was drinking, and when the owner called the police, he acted just as violently toward the officers who arrived on the scene. As the decade went on, the man became more troublesome, racking up more and more arrests for his fits of rage, but also for his actions while under the influence of some substance. Until finally, in 2012, he died of an overdose. Several years before her father passed away, and as she entered her teenage years, Sabrina began to behave in a troubling way. Almost every day, she was at the center of a fist fight, whether it was at Wycliffe High School or with someone she knew outside of school. In fact, she had no problem threatening her friends with a beating if they messed with her or made her angry. Her behavior at her grandmother Anna's house became just as erratic over time. In 2009, at age 14, Sabrina stole part of her grandmother's savings, which made Anna realize she could no longer control her. Because of this, she asked social services for help. After their intervention, it was determined that the teenagers should be placed in the Emma Cully Receiving Home, run by the Division of Child Services, with the goal of helping young people correct their behavior. However, in Sabrina's case, it wasn't that easy. Instead of improving after entering the system, her behavior got worse. At the home, she met other kids who, far from being a good influence, led her down the path of illicit substances and into even more trouble. So it became common for her to be moved from one foster home to another in an attempt to control her, or at least keep her from constantly getting into trouble. Keep in mind that she came from a family surrounded by substance abuse and violence, so it's likely that up to that point, she didn't know any other way to relate to people. After 2 years in the system, in 2011, her path crossed with the Knopfel family, a family that seemed willing to look beyond Sabrina's behavioral problems and focus on giving her the chance to have, for the first time, a home full of love. It wasn't just a coincidence. Lisa Knopfel had worked for more than 13 years as a social worker in the sexual abuse unit of the Cuyahoga County Department of Social Services. There, she was known not only for the passion she brought to her cases, but also for being one of the most empathetic people in the entire unit. Her dedication extended to every child she worked with, whether they were victims or abusers. But her interest wasn't limited to just her own cases. She often collaborated with other units in the department, whether by reviewing files or working directly with them. It's very likely that it was during one of these collaborations that she first came across Sabrina's file, which immediately caught her attention. This wasn't the first time this had happened. Lisa often offered help to the most vulnerable, which meant that on several occasions she temporarily took in those most in need. She welcomed children and teenagers into her home, even while raising her own daughters, until they found a permanent home. We don't know exactly when her house first became a foster home, but according to some sources, this may have happened after she divorced her first husband, Nick Zanella, in 2003, with whom she had Megan 4 years earlier. Without neglecting her own daughter, Lisa made sure to help as much as possible. She reached out to those children who didn't have a support network or anyone to care for them. In 2006, after dating for a while, Lisa married Kevin Nuthel, a professional driver who worked driving a truck for Gordon Food Services, a food distribution company for supermarkets. He also drove a bus for National Express, a transportation company in Ohio. Just like Lisa, Kevin had previously been married for 5 years, during which he had his first child. After the divorce, because of Kevin's job, the child went to live with his mother, although Kevin made sure to play a very active role in his life. The similarities in their stories and the way they saw the world so similarly made their relationship feel easy, as if they were meant to be together. Megan, Lisa's daughter, had completely accepted Kevin's presence in their lives as something natural. And by 2009, the blended family of three living in Willoughby Hills became a family of four when Lisa gave birth to Haley. Naturally, wanted to take care of everyone the way they deserved, the couple agreed to stop being a foster home, at least during Haley's first few years of life. And even though they kept that promise, when Sabrina Zunich's file landed in their hands in mid 2011, Lisa just couldn't help herself. She felt they had to give her a place, and after several conversations with her husband in July of that same year, they started all the paperwork so the 16-year-old girl could move in with them. From the very beginning, the Nuffels did everything they could to make the girl feel welcome in their home on Shagreen Drive. Lisa and Kevin made sure to give her her own room that Sabrina could decorate however she liked, while Megan, excited about the idea of having an older sister, tried to show her around the whole city. She also helped her get used to her new school, often ignoring their age difference and inviting her to hang out with her or her friends, while Sabrina made friends of her own. Although Sabrina had never known a traditional home with parents who genuinely cared about her, she quickly adapted to her new reality. Lisa and Kevin, besides being kind, provided her with the structure she had been missing. They made sure she attended classes, did her homework, and studied. This support was quickly reflected in her academic performance. Just a few months after moving in with the Noppels, Sabrina's grades improved significantly, and at the same time, she was able to make friends with her classmates. As for her relationship with the Knopfel family, everything also seemed idyllic. She got along very well with Megan and Haley, as well as with Lisa and Kevin. Although the closest relationship she had was with Kevin, since, according to what she told her friends, she felt he was the one she could be honest with without being judged. At first, this closeness didn't catch anyone's attention. But as the months went by, Sabrina's circle, and even Lisa herself, began to realize that the relationship between the teenager and the driver was not ordinary. Autumn Polvink, one of Sabrina's new friends, stated in a later interview that on several occasions she had felt uncomfortable seeing her friend and Kevin interact. And the thing is, their conversations were at the very least shady. Regardless of whether they were in front of other people, Sabrina and Kevin had no problem making sexual jokes to each other, as if it were completely normal. It was during that same time that, when alone with her friends, Sabrina started complaining about Lisa. She said that the social worker didn't treat her well, that she favored her biological daughters, and that the only one who cared about her was Kevin. Something that was hard to believe, considering Lisa was known for being a sweet and empathetic person who treated the children who temporarily stayed at her house as if they were her own. The strange interactions between Kevin and Sabrina in front of other people led to rumors starting to spread about the nature of their relationship. This was something Elisa was well aware of. The 41-year-old woman knew that her husband was spending more time than usual with Sabrina, being the only one who drove her to school every morning, looking at her more than normal, or making inappropriate comments. Unable to keep ignoring this kind of behavior, by the end of 2011, Lisa confronted her husband about what was going on. Kevin flatly denied having any romantic or sexual relationship with Sabrina, but as the weeks went by, it became harder and harder for Lisa to believe him. And she was right. Today, thanks to Sabrina's statements, we know that her relationship with Kevin took that turn in the spring of 2012, on a morning in March while he was driving her to school. Things started to change when Kevin put one of his hands on the teenager's thigh, and from that day on, the physical contact kept escalating until they were having sex daily in his car before she went into school. It's important to note that she was 17 years old and Kevin was over 43, in addition to being her legal guardian. Obviously. But that wasn't the first shady advance Kevin had made toward the teenager. Slowly, the man had started to build a very darkly intimate relationship. Months before they had sex for the first time, Kevin had offered her money in exchange for letting him take intimate photos of her, something Sabrina agreed to do only to make him happy. Without her realizing it, Kevin had started to manipulate her. Meanwhile, the relationship between Lisa and Sabrina was becoming more and more tense, and arguments in the marriage were becoming more and more common. Kevin began to plant the idea in the teenager's mind that he wanted to get a divorce. With sweet words tinged with supposed love for Sabrina, he started using the moments alone with the teenager to tell her how unhappy he was in his marriage and how he believed he could be much happier with her. Sabrina, being a teenager, believed Kevin. Unable to keep the secret, she told her friends, with genuine excitement, that her adoptive parents were going to get divorced. She wasn't upset or worried, but rather excited about the upcoming separation. However, Kevin never kept his promise to start the divorce proceedings. In early October 2012, Sabrina's tone changed. She stopped talking about the divorce and asked her best friend, Autumn, a much more disturbing question. She wanted to know if she knew anyone who would be willing to commit a murder for money. When Autumn asked her why, completely baffled, Sabrina confessed that Kevin, wanting to separate, thought Lisa was worth more dead than alive because of the various life insurance policies the social worker had, which totaled about $800,000. Sabrina was about to turn 18, and that meant she no longer had to stay under the novel's care. Something Lisa was fully aware of, and in fact, she was looking forward to it. She wanted the teenager out of her house, something Kevin took advantage of to start planting the idea in her head that they needed to get rid of Lisa. He was the one who told her about the life insurance policies the social worker had in her name and began fantasizing out loud about how they could use that money to start a life together, dreaming about making that life a reality. Sabrina convinced herself that Kevin was right, and without even questioning it, she began planning with him the death of the woman who had tried to give her a home. They had barely started coming up with the plan when, on October 27th, Sabrina turned 18. Refusing to leave Kevin's side, she appeared before the court to ask for permission to stay with the Knopfels until she graduated from high school. Given how much her grades had improved, the court found this reasonable. She got a request granted. Happy to be able to stay with the man she was in love with, I'm putting that in quotes, because she actually wasn't in love, it was more like grooming on his part, but that's another story. Sabrina seemed to forget about the plan Kevin had mentioned to her for 2 weeks. Focused on their moments alone while he drove her to school, Sabrina didn't think about killing Lisa again until the morning of November 15th, when, through tears, Kevin said he'd had a big fight with his wife and that he was going to end his own life if he stayed married to her. The fear of losing Kevin made the teenager immediately remind him that they could kill her, thus setting the driver's plan in motion. Around the 1:15 in the morning on November 16th, 2012, Sabrina Zunich put the plan into action exactly as Kevin had instructed her. After making sure that both Lisa and her 2 daughters were asleep, she left her room, careful not to make any noise. She walked to the master bedroom where her adoptive mother was sleeping alone since her husband was working in Michigan. Without saying a word to the woman and using a 10-inch knife, Sabrina began stabbing Lisa, who woke up from the pain. Despite the surprise of the attack, the woman tried to defend herself from the wounds the teenager was inflicting on her torso, arms, and neck. At that moment, the sounds of the struggle woke up Megan, who was 13 years old. She ran to her mother's room to see what was happening. Realizing what was going on, Lisa's daughter threw herself at the girl she thought of as her sister to try to stop her. She pulled her hair, bit her, and hit her in a desperate attempt to make her stop hurting her mother. But Sabrina was clearly much stronger than she was, so she wasn't very successful. So, without wasting any more time, Megan ran to the nightstand to look for her mother's phone and call 911. Desperate to get help, she managed to overcome her nerves and talk to the emergency operator, telling her, "She's stabbing my mom and hitting her."
101, what is your emergency?
Stabbing my mom with a knife. I keep freezing her.
This was the first thing she said, and when they asked her who was attacking her mother, Megan answered desperately, "My sister is trying to kill her."
Who has a knife?
My sister. She's gonna kill
That's the
my
name.
mom.
The first police unit took only a few minutes to arrive at the house, finding that both teenagers were still in the main residence. Megan was holding her mother's hand, who was barely still alive, and Sabrina was standing at the foot of the bed, the knife still in one of her hands. Little 3-year-old Haley was hiding in her mother's closet, crying silently. Sabrina was arrested right then and there, while they waited for the paramedics to arrive to help Lisa. Unfortunately, by the time they entered the house, the woman had already passed away, the victim of the 178 stab wounds the teenager had inflicted on her neck, torso, arms, and elsewhere. The attack had been so violent that the knife the girl used was literally bent. Zunich didn't put up any resistance. In fact, she didn't even seem to be aware that she herself was injured, and when the officers spoke to her, she seemed unable to answer them. She was definitely in shock. After taking her to one of the police stations, the officers called Kevin, who returned from Michigan a few hours later. His calm and almost indifferent attitude toward the horrific way his wife had been murdered caught the detective's attention. Far from seeming horrified, he wanted to know the details of the attack and seemed more concerned about Sabrina's condition. Even after taking a shower, he went to where she was being held to request to see her. When he was denied this, Kevin showed much more anger at that moment than when he was told his wife was dead. Even though Kevin's behavior had seriously caught the detective's attention, the truth was that the police already had the person responsible under arrest. There was no doubt whatsoever that Sabrina Zunich had been Lisa's killer. However, it still remained to be determined what the motives were behind the brutal attack she had committed. After the initial shock, the investigators tried to really find out what had happened that night by talking to Sabrina. But no matter how much, she never once tried to defend herself against the accusations. Accepting what she had done, she never wanted to go into detail about why she had done it. Even though she hadn't heard from Kevin since the day it all happened, she was convinced that he would come back to her. She naively believed that Kevin was just waiting to collect the insurance policies before helping her get out of jail so they could start the life they had always dreamed of. And staying loyal to what she believed was the love of her life, Sabrina turned down any opportunity to cooperate with the authorities to get to the bottom of the investigation. She even went so far as to turn down several deals that the prosecution offered her ahead of her trial, choosing to remain silent. Unable to count on her cooperation, the police focused on questioning those close to the main people involved. Sabrina's friends, who knew the couple, as well as neighbors and co-workers, were called to testify in the following months. This helped shed light on the strange dynamic between Kevin and Sabrina, while also increasing suspicion toward the recent widower, who didn't seem particularly interested in the progress of the investigation. Wanting to verify whether the rumors were true and if there was indeed a romantic or sexual relationship between Kevin and Sabrina, the police raided and thoroughly analyzed 22 electronic devices that belonged to or had been used by the killer and the victim's husband. However, no matter how many thousands of messages they read, they were unable to find any confirmation of their suspicions. Although in some exchanges they had told each other that they loved one another, the messages did not have any sexual or romantic undertones, so they could not be considered proof of a relationship. The investigation stalled until the spring of the following year, when Sabrina realized the truth. Kevin had already collected the insurance policies, but instead of getting her the best lawyers as he had promised, he finished paying off his house in Willoughby Hills and bought himself another house in Florida, in addition to paying for flight upgrades. Heartbroken, Sabrina realized that Kevin had no intention of helping her or building a life together. He had used her to murder Lisa and then completely abandoned her, leaving her to rot in jail while he enjoyed a huge sum of money. Feeling betrayed and even abandoned, on May 6, 2013, Sabrina asked to speak with the detectives on the case to tell them the truth. She said that the idea hadn't been hers, but Kevin's, who had suggested it weeks before it happened, encouraging her to find someone who could do it for them. When Sabrina was unable to find a hitman, Kevin changed the plan so that she would be the one to carry it out. He arranged his work schedule so he wouldn't be at the house when it happened, and he also told her how and when she should kill Lisa. The idea was for the murder to look like a robbery gone wrong, so he got her a ski mask she could use and gave her specific instructions. For example, after killing Lisa, she was to make several valuable items from the house disappear to make it more believable. But he also told her exactly where to stab Lisa so the wounds would be fatal. And as if it were a date, they went together to buy the knife, as if it were something romantic. When Sabrina showed that she wasn't a man, she seemed a bit unsure about the plan. Kevin had no problem bringing up the life they could build together and tried to calm her nerves by assuring her she wouldn't get caught. But if she did, he said she could plead insanity or they could make it look like self-defense, which was clearly a lie. The coldness with which Kevin treated Sabrina after everything not only broke the girl's heart, but also sealed her fate. Convinced that she had been deceived by the driver, after officially confessing in August of that same year, Sabrina agreed to testify against Kevin in a future trial. And so, a few days later, on the 9th of that same month, Kevin Knopfel was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, complicity in aggravated homicide due to his relationship with the victim, in addition to 6 counts of sexual assault against a minor he had in his care as an adoptive father. Kevin was the first to go to trial, with his court proceedings beginning in May 2014, almost 2 years after Lisa was murdered. With Sabrina's testimony against the accused, the prosecution was able to prove that the man had taken advantage of the influence he had over the teenager to manipulate her, convincing her to end his wife's life. As part of the evidence, not only was the girl's testimony presented, but also her medical records, which made it clear that Sabrina's mental health was not ideal. According to the psychiatric evaluations conducted during the investigation, the young woman, who was 19 at the time, was not only hyperactive but also bipolar, a condition for which she had never received treatment. This, together with her confession that she had heard voices on more than one occasion, helped the prosecution clearly show the jury how extremely vulnerable Sabrina was to the defendant's manipulation, who had also taken advantage of this to have sexual relations with a minor he was supposed to be caring for. The trial itself wasn't particularly long. It lasted about a month, during which various people took the stand, but not Kevin, who remained on the defendant's bench the entire time without showing any emotion. Not even when Sabrina took the stand and said she had come up with the plan together with him because she was in love. On June 11th of that year, after the prosecution and the defense presented their closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate, taking 9.5 hours to reach a decision. They finally concluded that Kevin Knopfel was guilty of the 11 charges against him. 6 for sexual abuse, 3 for being an accomplice to aggravated homicide, and 2 more for conspiracy to commit an aggravated crime. On August 6th, the judge presiding over the case sentenced him to life in prison for the 5 counts of homicide and another 12 years for the 6 counts of sexual abuse. It was determined that he could be eligible for parole in 2043, when he will be 73 years old. At the same time, he ordered that he must pay $1 million to his 2 daughters, Haley and Megan, for the harm he subjected them to with his gruesome plan. Despite the severity of the sentence, Kevin also showed no emotion when he was informed of his punishment, although his lawyers said they would appeal the decision. Sabrina's trial, on the other hand, was much shorter, since she pleaded guilty to aggravated homicide as soon as the trial began in August. As a result, the process consisted of only a couple of hearings before, on September 29th of that same year, the judge in charge of her case sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Parole would be possible after serving 30 years of her sentence, which means in 2042, when she will be 47 years old. Just like Kevin, Sabrina was also ordered to provide financial compensation to Lisa's daughters, having to pay $5 million for the damages and suffering she caused the girls with the horrific attack on their mother. Unlike Kevin, during the sentencing hearing, Sabrina decided to speak, and through tears, she said that Lisa didn't deserve to die and that she felt a deep sense of remorse and sadness for what she had done. Although she personally did not complain about her sentence and seemed to agree with the amount of time she was given in prison, her team of lawyers said they were not satisfied. According to them, their client should have been sentenced to the minimum penalty stipulated for a crime like hers, which is 20 years. Since the circumstances Sabrina came from and the significant influence Kevin Knopfel had on her actions were not taken into account. Today, both of them continue serving their respective sentences. But while we don't know anything about Kevin, Sabrina agreed to take part in Snapped Behind Bars, an Oxygen docuseries where different murderers in prison are interviewed. During the episode about this case, Sabrina tells what happened from her own perspective. At 31 years old, Zunich is aware that her actions were what ended Lisa's life, someone who had only ever had good intentions for her. However, it's made clear that even though she was a troubled teenager, without Kevin's manipulation, she never would have decided to take the life of her adoptive mother. And honestly, at this point, I'd really like to know your opinion, since for many people, what Sabrina says is correct, and they tend to fully believe her testimony. Because even though it can't be denied that she was the one who committed the brutal murder of Lisa Knopfel, it's essential to keep emphasizing the decisive role played by the victim's husband. Kevin was not only attracted to a minor who was extremely vulnerable because of her personal history, but he also deliberately started a relationship with her to achieve his own goals. Kevin manipulated and used Sabrina as nothing more than a tool to carry out his plans. Both the police and the judicial system concluded that Kevin's motives were purely financial. He didn't fall in love with Sabrina, nor did he dream of a life together with her. His only wish was to end a marriage he was no longer interested in. However, instead of choosing divorce like anyone else would, Kevin came up with a plan to murder his wife and not get caught. This would allow him to get his hands on a huge sum of money that he believed would change his life. Jacques. So let me know what you think about all this. I'm reading your comments. Maybe things would have been different if Lisa hadn't brought Sabrina home. Maybe Kevin would have tried to end her life anyway to get that money. If Kevin hadn't manipulated Sabrina, would Lisa still be alive? You can tell me what you think again down in the comments. With that said, we've reached the end of this video. Here are the channel members. Thank you for supporting me through this platform. I really appreciate it so much. With nothing more to say, here's a new video, and here's a recommended video. You can subscribe by clicking on my face, and I'll see you in another video. Goodbye.